Are 3D printed guns giving all 3D printing a bad name? 3D printing can do, of course, plenty of positive things, but the 3D printing of weaponry is a concern. In Australia, there's debate about whether specialist laws are needed to address it. Dr. Matthew Rimmer is a Professor of Intellectual Property and Innovation Law at QUT. He's also the Chief Investigator into an Australian Research Council project looking into the regulation of 3D printing. He had a chat to Karen Adam about how there's been a rapid rise in the capacity of 3D printers, and in America there's also a case taking things to the next level, Defence Distributed, which describes itself as a non-profit private defence contractor providing blueprints for printing guns, files that can be sent anywhere in the world.
There's often been a very polarised debate over 3D printing gun regulation. On the one hand, there has been some very apocalyptic concerns about the rise of 3D printing of guns, particularly with 3D printing plastic. There's a concern about there being ghost guns that are untraceable, that could go through metal detectors. On the other hand, there are those who argue that concerns about 3D printing of guns are a moral panic. They kind of take the much more nonchalant attitude that really it's very technically difficult to do. It's often going to be at the risk of the maker or the user of the 3D printed gun, and they think that some of the concerns have been overblown. But in the last few years, we certainly have seen a shift in the debate. Internationally, there has been high prominence given to Defence Distributed and their efforts to try to globally circulate files for 3D printed guns. Cody Wilson, in particular, was quite notorious for kind of promoting his particular company and its strategy. The Obama administration took action against Defence Distributed and said that it couldn't distribute such files globally because that would breach an arms control export law. Defence Distributed took the Obama administration to court, but the Obama administration won in the district court, and in the Court of Appeals, the Obama administration won 2-1. So the majority found that such action by the Obama administration was justified in terms of defence interests and national security. The dissenting judge was kind of concerned about the overbroad implications for freedom of speech. Donald Trump has settled that dispute, which seems to me very peculiar given that the US government was in a winning position in that piece of litigation. So a number of attorney generals from states throughout the United States have brought action against the Trump administration to stop that settlement from continuing. But individual states like New Jersey and California have passed some specialist laws to deal with the 3D printing of guns. And Tim Kaine, who was Hillary Clinton's running mate, has also introduced a bill into the United States Congress to try to regulate 3D printing of guns.
It's funny because I've only really thought about, I guess, illegal printing, 3D printing of guns, someone at home doing it. But you're talking about maybe gun manufacturers or defence businesses looking at 3D printing of guns as a business model.
There is a lot of concern about who might make use of 3D printed gun files. We've had some cases recently in the United States and Australia and the United Kingdom which have kind of suggested that perhaps some of the risks are greater than what we anticipated. So, interesting case in the US this year involving the United States government versus McGuinness. McGuinness couldn't procure regular guns because of a domestic violence order. He went off and tried to use 3D printing to develop gun parts and 3D printed weapons, and he was successfully sued in the United States. And I guess that's a kind of an interesting example of someone trying to get around gun regulations through using 3D printing. But increasingly in Australia, we've had a lot of debate in terms of regulation, but also in terms of litigation over 3D printing of guns. At a federal level, there was a parliamentary inquiry in 2015 looking at the ability of Australian law enforcement authorities to eliminate gun-related violence in the community. There was a specific recommendation coming out of that inquiry that Australia needed a uniform national approach to the regulation of 3D printing of guns. We've had a smattering of cases. There was also specialist regulations introduced in New South Wales, and we've had an interesting test case, R versus Sun, in which a cosplayer pleaded guilty to an offence of having digital blueprints for a firearm. In that particular case, Justice Penelope Wass, in her sentencing, took into account that he wasn't really motivated by any kind of criminal objective. He wanted just to create replicas that looked like the real thing for the purposes of his science fiction events. So that was a very interesting precedent.
Do you believe that there needs to be specialist laws making it illegal to print a gun or a weapon on a 3D printer in Australia?
I think it's a question of taking into account a question of risk. So in the Sunshine Coast case that was heard recently, Crown versus Murphy, action was taken over a drugs operation, and there was kind of a 3D printed weapons and a knuckle duster there, and the gentleman pled guilty. In that particular case, the prosecutors and the police could bring an action under existing laws. So I think there's a kind of an ongoing debate about whether or not you can rely upon general laws or whether you need to develop some sort of specialist set of offences. Partly I think the debate will be determined by the level of risks associated with 3D printing of weapons. The risks have been increasing as the technology becomes more sophisticated and as metal 3D printing becomes much more prominent. Having said that, I guess there's a concern to ensure that any such offence is narrowly tailored. So the research community has been very concerned about 3D printing of guns creating a bad reputation for legitimate uses of 3D printing. So 3D printing, for instance, is used in healthcare for prosthetics. It's used in terms of industrial manufacturing for car parts and planes. It's used in terms of creative industries and in terms of design. So there are a whole wide range of creative, innovative, legitimate uses. So I think the interesting thing about 3D printing is that it's a technology with mixed uses, and it's a question of encouraging the wide range of beneficial uses that are associated with the technology while also limiting and restricting abusive uses of that technology. So it's a tricky regulatory topic because of that, and also because you can circulate files globally. That poses its own challenge as well.
Pretty fascinating and kind of spooky stuff, isn't it? Matthew Rimmer is his name, and his expertise is intellectual property and innovation law at QUT. Speaking with Karen Adam there about this brave new world of 3D printing, specifically 3D printed weaponry.